When I was a little girl, I really, really wanted to be a princess. I loved princesses' grand adventures and their ability to garner respect and admiration just from being themselves. So one day, when I was on a play date with a lighter-skinned friend, I naturally decided to pretend to be a princess. But my lighter-skinned friend stopped me in my tracks. "You can't be a princess," she said, "because black princesses do not exist." My eyes started to tear up and my little hands started to ball up into fists, and I desperately wanted to shout, "Yes, they do! Black princesses do exist." But she was right. In my reality at the time, black princesses did not exist. I had never seen one on TV or in a movie or in any books. In that moment, my dreams of being a princess were totally shattered. Luckily, I got to see Brandy Norwood play Cinderella in Disney's 1997 interpretation of Roger and Hammerstein's classic, and my royal dreams were reignited. Nevertheless, I continued to see how lack of diverse representation affected students' aspirations through my childhood and adolescence. An example of this is when I went to high school. I went to a high school that was extremely diverse, that had lots of Black and Hispanic students. But I was part of an accelerated program in that high school, and inside of that program, there were not a lot of Black and Hispanic students. As a matter of fact, I was usually the only Black person in my class. The students inside of my program, who were mostly white and Asian, had access to comprehensive college readiness resources, while the students outside of my program did not. The students inside of my program were friends with, related to, and mentored by people who looked like them, by college graduates and college students who looked like them. But the people outside of my program were not. As I graduated from high school and moved through college, I began to notice that a lot of the Black and Hispanic students who had not been part of the accelerated program with me either had a hard time going to college or had a hard time completing college once they got there. So this raised a few questions for me. Why are some races underrepresented in these accelerated academic spaces? And how do these disparities in representation affect the communities in the long run? So, after doing some research, I found that social capital directly influences the amount of diverse representation that we see in these accelerated academic spaces. Put simply, social capital is connections to people who can give you access to the institutions and the information that you need for social mobility. Unfortunately, our society systemically prevents certain groups of people from gaining access to this necessary social capital. One of the ways that our society prevents people from gaining access to social capital is through poverty. The link between poverty and education becomes clear when we look at the funding mechanisms that are set up for public school funding. According to the US Census Bureau, approximately 45% of public school funding comes from local resources, and the majority of these local resources are property taxes. This means that schools that are in low-income neighborhoods with low property values receive relatively less local funding than their richer counterparts. And all of this is true despite the fact that the residents of these lower-income neighborhoods have less financial resources to begin with. Additionally, states could combat these disparities in local public school funding by strategically increasing states' funding for public schools. However, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, 35 states actually decreased their per-pupil investment in public school education between 2008 and 2014 when adjusted for inflation. Kansas, the state that I call home, is one of 14 states that actually decreased their per-pupil investment in education by 10% or greater between 2008 and 2014. This becomes pretty alarming when we think of how a lack of financial resources affects students' academic performance. Low-income students are more likely to drop out of high school, less likely to have strong teachers, and less likely to have challenging curricula, according to the National Center for Education Statistics and the Department of Education. Unfortunately, all of these facts about poverty and funding and academic performance directly relate to diverse representation. Due to a wide variety of discriminatory practices throughout America's history, the U.S. Census Bureau reports that Black, Hispanic, and Native or Indigenous communities are more likely to be low income than students of other racial groups. In essence, certain people of color in America are more likely to be poor, and people who are poor in America are less likely to have access to the educational resources that they need. Additionally, according to the U.S. government's Accountability Office, low-income Black and Hispanic students are becoming increasingly segregated from higher-income students of other racial groups. And yes, you did hear me correctly, segregation is still with us. The problem with this segregation is that these low-income Black and Hispanic students are becoming increasingly isolated from other people, which means their chances of connecting with people outside of their identity groups who could give them access to the institutions and the information that they need to successfully pursue a post-secondary education are becoming slimmer and slimmer. Another way that our society limits people from gaining access to social capital is through first-generation status. First-generation students are students who are the first in their families to go to college. But because these students are the first in their family to go to college, they have very few connections to people in their immediate, intimate networks who can give them access to the institutions and the information that they need to successfully pursue a post-secondary education. Additionally, the College Board reports that Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous or Native children are more likely to be first-generation students than other groups. Once again, this is due to a wide variety of historical and contemporary discriminatory practices in America, including most public universities' ability to legally discriminate against the aforementioned groups of people up until about 50 years ago. And even though our country has discriminated against these groups of people for so long and for so many generations, the College Board reports that these students are not more likely to receive extra resources or extra help when they're applying for college. So the extra resources or extra help that could level the playing field are not being put into place. This prevents these Black, Hispanic, and Indigenous or Native students from successfully pursuing a post-secondary education a lot of the time. And because it's so difficult for them to successfully pursue a post-secondary education, many of them don't. This leads to a lack of diverse representation on college campuses. Yet another barrier that prevents people from getting social capital in this society is being undocumented. Undocumented students, according to the Pew Research Center and the Department of Education, are disproportionately low income, have higher dropout rates, and often do not qualify for federal financial assistance when applying for college. Most states in America also do not allow undocumented students to qualify to pay in-state tuition. So because undocumented students are disproportionately low income, and they also do not qualify for federal assistance, this last blow of not being able to pay in-state tuition usually makes the financial burden too heavy for them, and it becomes difficult for them to pursue a post-secondary education. In fact, the Department of Education reports that only about 5 to 10% of undocumented students enroll in college, and even fewer graduate with a degree. Since undocumented students are disproportionately represented in some of the most disadvantaged racial groups, this directly impacts the amount of diverse representation that we have on college campuses. And lastly, being a girl of color can provide some barriers to gaining social capital that you need to pursue a post-secondary education. According to President Obama's former White House Council on Women and Girls, girls of color are pushed out of the education system through harsh school discipline, the sexual abuse to prison pipeline, and teen pregnancy. Additionally, girls of color are more likely to be low income than their white counterparts. Girls of color also often grow up to become mothers of color. And according to President Obama's former Council on Women and Girls, women of color are more likely to be head of household than their white female counterparts, and the wage gap makes them less likely to earn as much money as their white male and female counterparts as well. This means that these mothers of color end up raising their children in low-income situations in which the children go to schools that are funded by the low property taxes from their neighborhoods, and then the cycle of missed opportunity and missed social capital starts all over again. After hearing all of this information, I became enraged. I wanted to do something that would elevate the existence of Black and brown college students, and that would also create social capital for the students who were not receiving it. Because of this, I decided to found the Princess Project. The Princess Project is a college readiness program that seeks to empower underrepresented high school girls through mentorship. Now, all of this sounded like a great idea until I realized three things. One, I was only 20 years old. Two, I had absolutely no experience starting a social entrepreneurship venture. And three, how did I expect to start an entire organization that was based off of building networks and sharing knowledge when I had very limited networks and very little knowledge? I took these concerns to my parents and to my mentors, and they told me to confidently pursue my dream by holding tight to what I do know. So let me tell you what I do know. Underrepresented students are not underrepresented because they are less smart or less capable. Black, Hispanic, Native or Indigenous, first-generation, undocumented, and low-income students are just as smart and just as capable as the students who are currently getting the opportunities that I want these underrepresented students to have as well. Secondly, I know that seeing a physical validation of your dreams can give you the courage that you need to make those dreams a reality. For example, when I was a little girl and I saw a Black princess, it gave me the belief that I could be a Black princess as well. And thirdly, powerful networks can be created when people share the knowledge, the time, and the resources that they have and reach outside of themselves. I knew I was only 20, and I knew that I didn't know a lot, but I knew that I knew something. And the little that I knew could be shared to people who could benefit from it. So, in order to make this Princess Project happen, I went back to my old high school and figured out how to create college folders. College folders are literally folders that contain a lot of college readiness materials, including scholarship spreadsheets, recommendation letter request forms, ACT and SAT tips, and a lot of other things that help students to successfully apply for college. They're basically social capital in a folder. My idea was to have diverse female college mentors go into the high schools and walk underrepresented high school girls through these college folders so that they could gain the social capital that they would need to go to college. Also, having the diverse female college mentors would create a physical validation of the girls' college dreams and show them in real life that their dreams of going to college were valid and that they were not that far out of their reach. So I have been doing the Princess Project for about a year now, and it's been a total blast. I work with 6 to 8 girls, and we have so much fun together. We go on college visits together, we talk about boy bands together, we register for the ACT together, we eat tacos and Chinese food together. We basically do whatever it takes to make the girls feel included, but also to make the girls have all of the social capital that they need in order to successfully pursue a post-secondary education. Also, because I am a woman of color and a lot of the students I work with are girls of color, we don't have a problem talking about the issues that face minorities and the ways that we can combat those issues. An example of this is when me and some of my students were recently on a college visit, the lack of diversity on the college campus was so appalling that my students made a game out of counting how many Black people they saw as they went on the college tour. Although this is a lighthearted and funny example of some of the things that I do with my girls, it was also a great opportunity for us to talk about the lack of diverse representation on college campuses and what the girls can do to increase the amount of diversity at colleges once they graduate from high school. So, doing this project has taught me a few things. I've learned that I cannot dismantle entire systems of oppression by myself, but we can disrupt those systems by sharing the knowledge and time and resources that we have, by listening to people, and by reaching out to our communities when we need help. I've learned that we have to be intentional about creating social capital when unjust systems won't, and that we can help solve the world's big problems by sharing our own little gifts. Black students, Hispanic students, Native or Indigenous students, undocumented students, low-income students, and first-generation students deserve the opportunity to pursue a post-secondary education. And when our system won't afford them that opportunity, we have to fight to carve out spaces and carve out opportunities for these students to do that. So, in conclusion, I've learned that when we do not see the metaphorical Black princesses in our lives, sometimes we just have to become them. Thank you.